Let's hit the highways and byways and see if we can make it home in time for Thanksgiving. Let's get into it. Happy Thanksgiving, and today we're going to talk about a John Hughes film that has to do with getting home for Thanksgiving. No, I'm not talking about Dutch. The one we are talking about, we'll get into just a second. Do me a favor, like, comment, and subscribe. Join me here. I greatly would appreciate that. Today we're going to talk about planes, trains, and automobiles. This film dropped on November 25th of 1987, had a $15 million budget, and upon release it made $49.5 million, so it was another nice size hit for John Hughes. John Hughes wrote and directed this film. He was just coming off of Ferris Bueller's Day Off in 86 and Weird Science and The Breakfast Club in 85. So he was continuing his hit streak on with this film. And in this film, we have Steve Martin as Neil Page. He's an ad exec trying to find his way home in time for Thanksgiving to spend time with his wife and his two children. And we got John Candy, the great John Candy, as Dell Griffith. He is a shower curtain ring salesman. And we also got Kevin Bacon making an appearance in this film. We got Dylan Baker playing Owen. We got Ben Stein showing up and many other 80s character actors. A lot of actors you would recognize from a lot of other John Hughes films in little small parts here and there throughout the film. Now this film has a very simple setup here. We have Neil Page in New York on a business trip. It's a couple days before Thanksgiving and he's in this meeting and he's watching the clock on his watch. And he has a flight to make by 6 o'clock, and he promised his wife he'd be home by 9. He lives in Chicago. And this meeting takes way too long. Even his friend in the meeting says, "You'll never make the 6." And that's when we see Kevin Bacon, because him and Steve Martin's character, Neil, are running after this cab. It's rush hour, and Neil's trying to get a cab. That's why his friend said, "There's no way you're going to make it to the airport." And Kevin Bacon beats Neil to the cab because Neil trips over this huge trunk that was in his way, and he almost gets ran over by a goddamn car. And then he's looking to get this one cab, and then he offers this lawyer some money for it. And John Candy's character, Dell, who we've not really been introduced to yet, takes the cab and takes off. And we see Neil chasing the cab down the street, yelling, "You're messing with the wrong guy," which comes up again a few times throughout the film. And Neil ends up making it to the airport by taking the bus, but his flight is delayed, and he's going to be a little late getting home. He finally gets on the plane. He gets bumped from first class like he paid for, and he ends up sitting next to Dell, who he met in the airport waiting area. And he's sandwiched between him and his old man, who showed up again in Home Alone, another written and produced John Hughes movie. And basically, Dell and Neil get stuck together. They get sent to Wichita, Kansas, because there's a major snowstorm in Chicago, so their plane was diverted. They end up spending the night in the Braidwood Inn, who Dell had sold shower curtain rings to. He knew the owner of the inn, and they have to share a bed. And we get that awesome scene when they wake up the next morning, spooning, and Dell goes, "My other hand's between two pillows," and Neil's like, "It's not two pillows," and they wake up and do the whole tough guy thing and try to walk it off. And then it's basically just them trying to get home, and we get into shenanigans after shenanigans until finally, the morning of Thanksgiving, they do get back to Chicago. Neil gets on the train, starts heading back towards his house, and he leaves Dell behind at the station. They say their goodbyes. And by this point, Neil has grown to appreciate Dell and like Dell. And as he's going home, he's replaying the trip through his head, and he realizes Dell may not have a home. And he goes back to the train station, and Dell's sitting there, and he goes, "Dell, what are you doing here?" And he explains to Neil about how his wife passed away 7 years ago. He doesn't have a home. And basically that's when we realize, the audience, that he's been living out of that huge trunk that Neil tripped over in the beginning. And this man's basically just been on the road this whole time since his wife passed. And Neil takes him home for a warm Thanksgiving meal, introduces him to the family, and we get that last shot of that freeze frame on John Candy with that smile on his face. So, very simple premise here, just a gentleman trying to get home for Thanksgiving, meeting this guy on the road, and they end up having a lot of bonding experience, even though Neil finds this guy really annoying at first, but through their experiences, they get to really appreciate each other. Although Dell's a happy-go-lucky guy, he tries to be positive in any situation, where Neil's more of a fatalist almost, and he's kind of a prick to Dell in certain parts we'll talk about in a second. So what to like about this film? Well, the film hinges on two performances. Even though everybody else is great in this film, there's two performances that matter the most. Obviously, the great John Candy as Dell, and we got Steve Martin as Neil. And their chemistry is what makes this film, their interactions together, the situational humor that goes along throughout this film. And if it wasn't for these two gentlemen in these roles, this film would not work as well as it does. Now, obviously, you got your John Hughes movie traits that he's used through all of his films, and even through all the goofy shit and the over the top, some of the over the top stuff that does happen to our two leads. He does find time to have heartfelt moments in there. Like in the hotel room before we get that spooning scene in the morning, Dell is clearing his throat, clearing his nostrils, and Neil gets pissed off because it's been going on for far too long, and he gets up and he berates him and just tears him down. He takes it way too far. There was a point where Neil should have stopped, where it was kind of funny, even as us as the audience members find it a little funny, and then he just takes it way too far. And the look on John Candy's face is what sells it. John Candy was always one of those actors, great comedic actor, and you always liked him immediately whenever he showed up on screen, no matter what character he was playing. And we can even see how he's annoying to Neil on the airplane, and even some things that he does piss Neil off. But in this moment, even though Dell kind of deserved a little bit of talking to, when Neil pushes it too far and look on John Candy's face, you can't help but feel so bad for this man. And it's a really great scene and shows the dynamic there. You never know who you're going to meet in life. And even though at first glance you might not think that somebody you're going to get along with, or even first couple interactions, but over time, and just like in this movie, it happens. I mean, they go through some really crazy ass shit to get to that point, but it's all made worthwhile because of these two men's performances. And Steve Martin and John Candy really knocked this out of the park. Now, originally for those roles, they were not who John Hughes intended to hire. He actually was going to hire Tom Hanks for Neil Page. He wanted Tom Hanks for Neil Page, not that he was going to hire him, because Tom Hanks turned it down. I think he was busy on something else. And John Travolta as Dell. So this movie would have, not that I like Tom Hanks as an actor, I like John Travolta as an actor. I think both men are really good actors. But I can't imagine this movie with anybody else but John Candy and Steve Martin, because they're fabulous. You get to see him with Owen when he got picked up in the pickup truck. And Dylan Baker made all those character traits up on his own. John Hughes really gave him the freedom to just go nuts with that character. And he did. And he gives a great performance in the short amount of screen time. He's awesome. And when he spit to shake Steve Martin's hand in that scene, they kept filming the scene over and over and over again, and John Hughes didn't think it was working right, so he went up to Dylan Baker, whispered in his ear what to do. So when he did it, Steve Martin had no idea he was going to spit in his hand and then reach out to shake his hand, and a disgusted look on Steve Martin's face was actually genuine, because he had no idea Dylan Baker was going to do that. And as a matter of fact, as soon as he said cut, he ran off and washed his hand. The whole crew busted out laughing. Now, John Candy and Steve Martin have both said in interviews that this is their favorite movie they've ever done. And you know, you could tell these guys probably had a really good time making this film. There was actually a 3-hour and 40-minute cut of this film. Obviously, it's too long to release as a comedy, so they cut it down to a little over 2 hours, and then they cut it down again to get it down to the hour and 33 minutes as we know today. Now, there is a 4K that just dropped on Tuesday that has 45 minutes of extra footage, alternate takes, more footage that they found on a VHS tape that John Hughes had, because I think all the footage that was shot, I know John Hughes said before he passed that the Paramount had all the footage, but it's probably deteriorated by now. But they did put on a new 4K disc. So if you really love this film, there's 45 minutes of footage we've never seen on that 4K. I ordered it, although it didn't make it in time. It's not supposed to get here until next week. Amazon kind of dropped the ball on that one, but whatever, I'll let them go. John Hughes was inspired to write this film based on a trip that he took from New York to Chicago. His plane got sent to Wichita because of a storm, and it took him 5 days to get home, and that's why he wrote this film off of an experience that he had. I really like this film. It's one of those, we don't have too many Thanksgiving films. This and Dutch, which also was written and produced by John Hughes, maybe I'll do that next year, are two of the few. I mean, you got Hallmark that did a few, but honestly, for major studio releases, this is one of the few. It's one I watch every year. It has some awesome comedy, awesome situational comedy. Obviously, that car rental scene with Steve Martin is fucking legendary. He's great in that scene. And I just love that scene. It makes me crack up. For the moment he starts going on his tirade, I think the scene lasts whole 1 minute of him going off until she says, "You're fucked." It's just a fabulous movie. And again, it hinges on Steve Martin and John Candy. And his two men were up to the task, and they're great here. I really like this film. I really do. It's a movie I revisit every year. Obviously, I bought the 4K because I really do love this film. And John Hughes was great at holiday movies because he wrote and produced Home Alone 1 and 2. So, and here we gave us a Thanksgiving film, which we don't got too many. So at the end of the day, I would give Planes, Trains, and Automobiles a 9.5 out of 10. Again, it's because of the performances really sell it, and there's some really funny shit in this movie. 9.5 out of 10 for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. What are your thoughts on this movie? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. Hit the thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video. I would appreciate that. I just want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. I'll be back soon with another review. But until then, bye.